There's something wrong with the house we bought, and it's watching us. We bought our dream house 2 months ago. It was a beautiful old colonial tucked away at the edge of a forest, far from the noise and bustle of the city, with its wooden beams, wrap-around porch, and a yard that seemed to stretch on forever. We couldn't have been more excited. My wife, Emma, and I had spent years saving, planning for a place like this, where we could finally slow down and start a family. But something was off from the beginning. The first night, after we unpacked the essentials and sat on the porch with our wine, I noticed it. The woods. Something about them was unsettling. Maybe it was the silence. It was too quiet. Even in the dead of night, a place like this should have been teeming with life. The occasional sound of crickets, a rustling in the trees, anything. But the air was thick, heavy with a silence that made my skin crawl. I shrugged it off. Moving is stressful, and I figured my nerves were just getting the better of me. That was until Emma woke me up around 3 a.m., her voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" I sat up, listening. At first I thought she was just hearing things, but then it came. A slow, deliberate tapping. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. It wasn't coming from inside the house, but from just outside our bedroom window. I leapt out of bed and pulled back the curtain. Nothing. No one there. Emma and I laughed about it the next morning, chalking it up to the wind, or a branch brushing against the house. But in the daylight, when I went outside to inspect the area near the window, there were no branches nearby. In fact, there was nothing within several feet of the house that could have made that sound. The tapping continued every night for the next week. It always came at 3 a.m., like clockwork. Sometimes it was louder, more insistent, as if whatever was out there wanted to come in. Emma started leaving the lights on in our room, and I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, listening for that sound, dreading it. It wasn't long before other strange things began happening. Emma noticed it first. She was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard footsteps on the porch. Thinking I was outside, she opened the door to greet me. No one was there. She brushed it off as her imagination, but when I came home that evening, she looked pale, on edge. "It happened again," she said, her voice shaky. "I swear I heard someone on the porch, but no one was there. I don't like it here, Adam. Something feels wrong." I tried to comfort her, but I was starting to feel it too. The sense that we weren't alone. The house was old, sure, but it didn't explain the way the air felt thick, oppressive. It didn't explain the way the shadows seemed to stretch just a little too far, or the way the light flickered, even though we'd just had an electrician check the wiring. And it definitely didn't explain the figure Emma saw in the woods. It was around dusk, and we were sitting on the porch again, trying to enjoy the last moments of daylight. She was quiet, staring out toward the trees, her wine glass forgotten in her hand. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on something in the distance. "There," she whispered, pointing toward the woods. "Do you see that?" I followed her gaze, squinting into the fading light. At first, I didn't see anything, but then, there it was. A figure, tall, motionless, standing just at the edge of the trees, too far away to make out any details, but close enough that I could feel its eyes on us. My stomach dropped. "I think it's watching us," she whispered. And then it was gone. Just like that, it vanished into the trees, as if it had never been there at all. We didn't talk much after that. We just went inside and locked the doors, pretending that it didn't happen. But I could feel it. Whatever it was still there, lurking just out of sight, watching. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt just outside the porch. They were large, far too big to belong to a person, and they led into the woods. The thing was, there were only 2 sets of prints, one leading into the trees, and none coming back out. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, maybe a bear, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Things escalated quickly after that. Objects started moving around the house, nothing major at first, just little things like keys or Emma's jewelry. We thought we were just being forgetful, misplacing things in the chaos of moving. But then we started finding them in strange places, places we would never have put them. Emma's wedding ring, for instance, showed up in the attic one morning, even though she never took it off. And then the nightmares started. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced that someone, or something, was standing over me, watching. I'd sit up, gasping for air, and the room would be empty. But the feeling wouldn't leave. The sense that something was wrong, that something had followed us home from the woods, clung to me like a shadow. Emma didn't say much after that, but I could tell she was having the same dreams. I could see it in her eyes, the way she looked exhausted, drained. Whatever was happening, it was getting stronger, more relentless. We couldn't escape it. Then came the night everything changed. It was around 3 a.m. again, and I woke up to the sound of the tapping. But this time it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the house. It was coming from the attic. I sat frozen in bed, listening. The tapping was slow and deliberate, just like it had been outside. My mind raced. How could it be coming from the attic? Emma stirred beside me, her eyes wide with fear as she, too, heard it. "We have to check," I whispered, trying to sound brave but feeling anything but. Emma didn't respond, just nodded, her face pale. I grabbed the flashlight from my bedside table and crept out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I made my way to the attic door at the end of the hallway. The tapping continued, steady and rhythmic, as if something, or someone, was knocking from the other side of the wall. I hesitated at the attic door, my hand resting on the cold metal doorknob. Emma stood behind me, her breathing shallow. I could feel her fear, and it only amplified my own. With a deep breath, I twisted the knob and pulled the door open. The tapping stopped. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness of the narrow staircase leading up to the attic. "Stay here," I whispered to Emma, though she didn't seem eager to follow me anyway. Slowly, I climbed the stairs, the wood groaning beneath my weight. The air grew colder as I ascended, a chill that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I reached the top and stepped into the attic. It was empty. The only sound was my own labored breathing as I swept the beam of the flashlight across the dusty, cobweb-covered rafters. Nothing had been disturbed. Boxes and old furniture lay where we had left them when we moved in. The floor was thick with dust, untouched. There was no sign of anyone or anything that could have made the tapping. But I could feel it. That same oppressive presence, the feeling that I was being watched, surrounded me. My skin prickled, and I suddenly felt like I needed to get out. I backed down the stairs, never taking my eyes off the attic, and shut the door behind me. "I didn't see anything," I whispered, trying to calm my racing heart. But Emma wasn't listening. She was staring down the hallway toward the open front door. The door was wide open. "I locked that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the darkened doorway. "Adam," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we need to leave." I didn't argue. Grabbing her hand, we hurried down the stairs and out to the car, not even bothering to grab our things. As we pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There, standing on the porch, was the figure from the woods. It watched us as we drove away, disappearing into the night. We didn't go back for 2 days. We stayed at a motel in town, trying to figure out what to do. Neither of us slept much, and when we did, the nightmares were worse than ever. I dreamt of the house, of something dark and twisted, lurking just out of sight, watching us from the shadows. When we finally worked up the nerve to go back, everything seemed normal. The front door was locked, just as we had left it. Nothing was out of place, and yet, the house felt different. The air was heavier, colder. It was as if the house itself was watching us, waiting. We tried to carry on like normal, but it was impossible. The tapping came back, louder and more insistent, and now it was everywhere. Outside, inside, even in our heads. Emma stopped sleeping altogether, and I found myself lying awake, listening to the sounds of the house, waiting for the next strange occurrence. Then, one night, Emma disappeared. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the tapping, but this time, something was different. It wasn't coming from outside or from the attic, it was coming from inside our bedroom. My heart pounded as I sat up and glanced over at Emma's side of the bed. She was gone. "Emma?" I called, my voice shaking as I fumbled for the flashlight. No answer. My pulse quickened, and panic set in. I scrambled out of bed, calling her name again, louder this time. The house remained silent, except for that infernal tapping, which seemed to echo through the walls, mocking me. I searched the entire house, every room, every corner, but there was no sign of her. The front door was locked, and all the windows were closed. It was as if she had simply vanished. In a daze, I grabbed my phone and called the police. I tried to explain, but even as the words left my mouth, they sounded ridiculous. "She's gone," I kept repeating. She was right next to me, and now she's gone. They didn't understand. How could they? They sent someone out to the house, but by the time they arrived, the tapping had stopped, and there was nothing to suggest that anything was wrong. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, nothing. They took my statement, filed a missing persons report, and told me to wait. That's all I could do, wait. But I couldn't just sit there. I couldn't stay in that house another minute, knowing that whatever had taken Emma was still there, watching, waiting. I packed a bag and left, driving aimlessly through town, trying to make sense of what had happened. I ended up at a bar on the outskirts of town, nursing a drink and trying to forget the look on the officer's face when I told him about the tapping. He didn't believe me. No one would. I spent the next few days in that motel again, trying to avoid the house, but I couldn't escape it. Every night, I heard the tapping in my dreams. It followed me wherever I went, growing louder, more insistent. Then, one morning, I woke up to find my phone ringing. It was an unknown number, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Adam," a voice whispered on the other end. It was Emma. My heart leapt into my throat. "Emma, where are you? What happened? Are you okay?" There was a long pause, and then she spoke again, her voice distant, hollow. "Come home, Adam. Please. Come home." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief, my hands shaking. It couldn't be real. It had to be a trick, some kind of cruel joke, but deep down I knew it was her, and I knew what I had to do. I drove back to the house, my mind racing. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I couldn't just sit by and do nothing. Not when Emma needed me. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked the same. The house stood silent, imposing, as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped out of the car and made my way to the front door, my heart pounding in my ears. I hesitated for a moment, then unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet. I called out for Emma, but there was no response. The air felt heavier than before, thick with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. I made my way through the house, checking each room, but it was empty. Then I heard it, a voice. Faint, barely audible, coming from the basement. "Adam," it whispered, and my blood ran cold. I hadn't been in the basement since we moved in. It was dark, damp, and unfinished, a place that seemed to harbor secrets best left alone. But now, with Emma's voice calling to me from below, I had no choice. I descended the stairs slowly, the old wood creaking under my weight. The air grew colder the further I went, and the smell of damp earth filled my nose. My flashlight flickered as I reached the bottom, casting long shadows across the stone walls. There, in the corner of the basement, stood a door. It hadn't been there before. My heart raced as I approached the door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. The metal was cold to the touch, and as I pulled the door open, A gust of icy air rushed past me. Beyond the door was a narrow hallway, its walls lined with old wooden planks. At the end of the hallway, a faint light flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. "Adam!" the voice called again, louder now, more urgent. "Come to me." I stepped forward, my heart pounding harder with each step down the narrow hallway. The light at the end flickered weakly, casting strange, dancing shadows along the walls. The air grew colder the closer I got, and I could hear a faint, rhythmic thumping, almost like the tapping I had been hearing for weeks. But now it was slower, heavier, as though it were coming from something deep underground. "Emma?" I called out, my voice trembling, though I wasn't sure I wanted a response. The voice didn't answer this time. Instead, the hallway seemed to grow longer with every step, stretching impossibly far, as though the house itself was warping, pulling me deeper into its grasp. The walls began to feel like they were closing in, and the floor beneath my feet seemed to vibrate, subtly at first, then more pronounced, like something was moving just below the surface. When I finally reached the end of the hallway, the light overhead flickered one last time before it went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled with my flashlight, trying to keep my shaking hands steady, and when the beam flickered back on, I saw it. Another door. This door was different. It was old, impossibly old, with thick wooden planks, splintered and rotting at the edges, and iron hinges that were rusted over. A strange symbol was carved into the wood, something that looked almost like an eye, with jagged lines radiating outward from it. As I reached for the door handle, a chill ran down my spine, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had come too far. Emma was somewhere behind this door, and I had to find her. I pulled the door open, and the moment I did, the tapping stopped. What lay beyond the door wasn't what I expected. It wasn't another room. It was something else. An expanse of darkness stretching out into infinity. The floor dropped off just beyond the threshold, and below, in the depths of that abyss, I could hear something moving. The sound was wet, heavy, like the shifting of enormous, unseen limbs. I shined my flashlight into the void, but the light didn't penetrate the darkness. It just disappeared, swallowed up by the blackness. Then I heard the voice again. "Adam, come closer!" It was Emma's voice, but distorted, as if she were speaking underwater. My heart raced, my pulse pounding in my ears as I stepped forward, my foot hovering over the edge of the drop. The darkness seemed to pulse, drawing me in like a tide pulling me out to sea. I leaned forward, trying to peer into the abyss, but before I could take another step, I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold, skeletal fingers gripping me tightly. I spun around, the flashlight beam swinging wildly through the dark hallway, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest, and I staggered backward, barely catching myself before I toppled over the edge into the void. "Adam!" the voice came again, and this time it was closer, too close. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I turned back to face the void, and there, standing at the edge of the darkness, was Emma, or what had once been Emma. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her eyes sunken deep into her skull, and her mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. Her skin was stretched too tight over her bones, and she moved with a jerky, unnatural motion, as though something inside her was pulling at the strings. "Come home, Adam," she whispered, her voice like nails scraping against my mind. "Come with me." I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming, hallucinating, anything but this. But then Emma stepped forward, her skeletal hand reaching out for me, her twisted smile widening. Behind her, in the depths of the void, something enormous shifted in the darkness. I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I was out of the basement, out of the house, and back in my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. As I sped away, The house loomed behind me, its dark windows staring after me like empty, soulless eyes. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the house, my heart pounding and my mind reeling from what I had seen, or thought I had seen. Emma couldn't be gone, not like that. But the image of her twisted, hollow face and that thing lurking behind her wouldn't leave my mind. For hours, I sat in my car, parked at the edge of town, trying to figure out what to do. The house, the basement, the void, it all felt too real to be a dream, but too impossible to be real. The police wouldn't help. They'd already thought I was losing it. I couldn't go back to the house, not alone. I was about to start the car and drive, anywhere but there, when my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the screen, dread clawing at my chest. With trembling fingers, I answered. Adam. It was Emma again. Her voice was softer this time, almost pleading. You left me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sound of her voice, but it was too late. The darkness was creeping back in, wrapping itself around me, pulling me under. Come back, Adam. Come home. I couldn't breathe. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to tear the phone away, but I was frozen, trapped by her voice, by the memories of that house, of what had happened in the basement. I need you, Adam. Come back to me. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor of the car with a thud, but I didn't pick it up. I just sat there, staring out at the empty road, the shadows stretching long across the asphalt. Somehow I knew I had no choice. I had to go back. When I finally returned to the house, everything was quiet. The windows were dark, the porch empty. The oppressive feeling that had haunted the place since we moved in was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. I stepped inside and immediately I felt it, the cold. The same cold I had felt in the basement, in that hallway. It seeped into my bones, wrapping around my heart like icy fingers. The door to the basement was wide open. I don't know what possessed me to go down there. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the thought of Emma, twisted and lost in that darkness. Maybe it was something else entirely. But I went. I descended the stairs slowly, my feet heavy, my mind racing. The hallway at the bottom was the same, the old wooden planks creaking under my weight, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. And there, at the end of the hallway, the door waited. The symbol carved into the wood seemed to pulse, as though it were alive, watching me with its jagged eye. My hand reached for the door handle before I even realized what I was doing, and as I pulled it open, the darkness beyond seemed to swallow me whole. I stepped inside. The void stretched out before me, endless and empty, and yet I could feel something moving in the depths, something ancient, something hungry. And then there she was, Emma. She stood at the edge of the abyss, her twisted face illuminated by the faint, flickering light. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of despair, of longing. Adam, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm trapped. I took a step forward, my heart breaking at the sight of her. Emma, I'm here. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief moment I saw her, really saw her, the woman I had married, the woman I loved. And then, the darkness behind her shifted. The thing in the void was waking up. I could feel it now, its eyes on me, its breath on the back of my neck. Emma reached out to me, her hand trembling, her voice filled with desperation. Help me, Adam, please. But I couldn't move. The darkness was pulling at me, wrapping itself around my legs, dragging me toward the edge. And then I saw it. The thing in the void. It was massive, its form shifting and writhing, its eyes glowing like embers in the blackness. It reached out with long, skeletal fingers, and as it did, Emma's face twisted again, her features contorting into something monstrous. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run. But I couldn't leave her. Not again. I took a step forward, my hand reaching out for hers, And as our fingers touched, I felt it, the cold, the emptiness. Her skin was ice, her eyes hollow. "Adam," she whispered, her voice no longer her own. "Come with me." I yanked my hand back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The thing in the void loomed closer, its presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. I had to get out. I had to leave. With one last look at the twisted thing that had once been my wife, I turned and ran. I ran up the stairs, through the hallway, out the front door, and into the night. I didn't stop until I was far from the house, far from the thing in the void, far from Emma. And even now, as I sit here miles away, I can still hear it. The tapping, it's getting louder. The end.